Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Thank you and welcome back. This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, your favorite podcast, I'm sure. I'm Dennis Rimmer, and on the line with us today from somewhere in Washington State, we have author R.L. Pace. I knew him as Bob Pace in a previous life, but his pen name, if you're looking for his books, R.L. Pace, and we'll find out about that in a moment. But first of all, R.L. Pace, or Bob Pace, how's things out your way during these troubling times?
Troubling. It's life. It's what we live. It's how we live. It's how we react. And so things are okay, and then they're not okay, and you find yourself in most things in life defending yourself a lot. What are you defending? I don't know. The current thing is we're defending ourselves against COVID-19, but you could be defending yourself against high fuel prices or low sales in your books or things like that.
Things like that. And so COVID-19, of course, is a gigantic hoax. It's fake. It's perpetrated by everybody else in the world to bring down Donald Trump. Am I right?
I suspect that the 170,000 plus people who have died of it here in the United States might not take that same attitude. They probably suspect it's real. And when you add in all the families that have been affected by that as well, they probably think it's real too. And
I think so.
I'm in that group.
And what's weird is Whatcom County, at last count, where you and I both used to live in upper northwest Washington State, I thought I saw a death toll of 40. And here in the entire province of Saskatchewan of 1.2 million people, the death toll is 22. So maybe that shows a difference between what goes on in Canada and what goes on in the U.S., but that's a story for another time. We're with Bob Pace now. Pen name is R.L. Pace, and he has a trilogy. It's the Rising Sun trilogy, S-O-N, and it deals with events in and around Japan and the US of A, so it's kind of a play on words because Japan, of course, is the land of the rising sun. So let's get right into it. R.L. Pace, Bob Pace, Island Dawn. Did Ulysses S. Grant unwittingly cause the bombing of Hawaii that precipitated U.S. entry into World War II? Now, what the heck are you doing with that?
Well, everybody, the thing about writing fiction is that all fiction, so far as I know, starts with a basic question: what if?
What if?
And then you add the if part of it. So one day in a library, when I was killing some time, didn't have anything else to do, I was thumbing through a copy of Jane's fighting ships, which anybody who's familiar with military stuff knows that Jane's is considered to be the authority worldwide on armaments and things of that nature. So that's the... So you're just thumbing your way through that, and I ran across something that kind of surprised me. The Japanese, during World War II, built submarines, huge submarines. They had the biggest submarines in the fleet, and they carried airplanes on them.
Okay,
well,
that's a jaw-dropper right there.
Yeah, exactly, and so I thought to myself, well, it can carry 2 bombers or 3 fighters, so that, of course, starts the wheels turning. So the what-if question became, what if Pearl Harbor wasn't Yamamoto's first idea?
Ah. And Yamamoto
What
was
if
the admiral of the Japanese Navy and sort of the guy in charge.
Right, he was the commander in chief of the Imperial Navy of Japan, who, as a side note, spent a lot of time trying to talk Japan out of going to war with the United States. He was educated at Harvard, and he had spent time going around the United States, and he'd seen the vast oil fields in Texas. He'd seen endless rail cars coming into Pennsylvania with iron ore and coal. So he had some notion of the immense production capabilities of the United States, and so he spent all his time trying to impress upon the leadership in Japan that this was a really bad idea. you don't want to make these guys mad, but of course he didn't prevail. So being the good sailor that he was, he saluted and said, "Okay, if this is what you want to do, then I'll try to do the best I can at it." So the premise of the story starts out as what might his plan have been had it not been Pearl Harbor. So the story arc goes. As I started writing this thing, I discovered that instead of being a quick summer read of 250 or 300 pages, there was a lot of backstory that had to go into it to make any sense out of it. So as you're writing the backstory, anybody who's written fiction knows that you're going along and things seem to be going fine and your plan is working out and all your notes and your précis and your all the stuff you use to keep track of what's going on suddenly just makes a left turn and your characters start writing something completely different that you had no idea. Characters go places and do things when you're a writer that you don't expect, and so you just go with it. So anyway, this goes back to about, it starts in book one, roughly in 1890, and then it works its way through, all the way through until about 1990. It's about a 100-year span that follows the life of a Japanese family, a very poor, poverty-stricken Japanese family, and there's one of their children's journey from Japan to the United States. One of the things that we see in a lot of fiction in the United States were a lot of coming to America stories from the Eurocentric viewpoint.
Right.
Coming from Italy, coming from Russia, coming from Ireland, generically coming from Europe to the United States. A lot of stories written in that regard. Very, very few stories written where the protagonist has a coming to the United States story originating in Japan or elsewhere in Asia, Japan or China or Korea or what have you, and the kinds of issues and problems that they encountered making that trek to the West Coast. So there are two story arcs. One is the story arc of this particular person and the family that gets involved over a century's worth of arc, and then there's the story of the plan, the first plan, and why that didn't work out with regard to Pearl Harbor. And there's an intersection where story arc 1 and story arc 2 connect, and so it takes a while. It's taken a while, and it started, like I say, it started out being, well, I'll just knock out this quick 250, 300 page thing. It's a fun beach ride, beach read, and so now it's being compared. I had somebody tell me as they were reading the copies, "This is really, really good. It's very Michener-esque," and I thought, okay. Michener's not selling real well right now, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. To coin a phrase.
Yeah, the story is what it is, and so that's just the it's what it is. So you're right until you're done.
The story has to be served.
Right, that's right. And it's the job of the editor to tear it all apart and say, this all stinks, do it over.
We're talking with author R.L. Pace. I know him as Bob Pace or Robert Pace, but R.L. Pace, and Pace is common spelling, P-A-C-E, discussing his Rising Sun trilogy and his what if moment. And most fiction writers, or even non-fiction writers, will tell you that what if means, oh my gosh, the writer's thinking, what if this happened? Like, you'll take a Stephen King story, what if vampires are real? What if a girl could start fires, etc. So Robert Pace, R.L. Pace, what if a story was about Japan going into the Second World War, much against the wishes of Admiral Yamamoto? So you're telling us that the first target wasn't necessarily going to be Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So what did you find out after that?
Well, the premise, my premise, was built on the fact that they had these submarines that carried airplanes. So, without giving away too much of the story, Yamamoto sends these submarines on surveillance missions, because now they can send planes that fly over the west coast of the United States to get a closer look at facilities right now, as opposed to what it may have been 10 or 15 years ago when he was at Harvard. So he sends off these submarines, and the story evolves from there.
And the story is also an immigrant song story, like you said, about people coming to the US of A from the east or the west, or whatever direction you're going from, not necessarily Europe or Russia, but the Orient. And it also involves sort of a dark day in the both shared history of Canada and the US, in that we decided to round up all Japanese people and send them off somewhere when the World War II started.
Yeah, that was a very dark day for democracy. Certainly, there in the United States there were about 115,000 people on the west coast of the United States, and I presume Canada as well, mostly the Western Hemisphere.
Exactly.
And we built what were referred to as relocation centers, which is euphemistic for concentration camps. People were given 6 weeks' notice to sell or otherwise deal with whatever property they had, and be prepared to be shipped off someplace that was not disclosed to them. They had no idea where they were going. They had no idea how long they were going to be there. They had no idea what they would be coming back to when they were finally released. And on top of that, now that's Order 9066, the executive order. You read about all the executive orders that Donald Trump is signing. Each one has a number. And the executive order that Franklin Roosevelt signed that enabled this event was Executive Order 9066. And it's an infamous number in executive orders. So anyway, these people got shipped off to various sites in the United States and Canada, where they spent the war in literally tar paper barracks. They were barracks that were 20 feet wide and 80 feet long, broken up into 20 by 20 rooms, They were built with wood that was so green that when the internees first arrived, you could actually hear the building shrinking as it dried out. And and it dried out so much that knotholes would fall out of the wood, and people would find holes bigger than a silver dollar in the floorboards, and there'd be a half-inch gap in the floorboards and in the walls. So it was a pretty horrific condition. There was one latrine for every, I think it was 4 units, and it really was a concentration camp. These people may have been called internees, but in point of fact, they were prisoners of war.
Exactly, and just to interject, we're talking with R.L. Pace, author of the Island Dawn book series, which goes under the name of the Rising Sun trilogy. I'll get that right yet. But to interject a personal note, I know of what you speak. My father grew up in Vancouver in the 20s and 30s, and Vancouver, BC. A lot of his friends were Japanese. There was one guy who was one of his buddies who got shipped off, and I don't think he ever saw him again. Japanese fishing boats, or fishing boats owned by Japanese fishers who were Canadian citizens, got seized. Their houses were sold, like you said, out from under them, and they were shipped off, mainly in our case, in Canada's case, to places in Alberta. And for Star Trek fans, George Takei, everybody knows him as, what was he, Sulu? From Star Trek. His family was involved in this, right?
Oh, yes, he was. He was initially, he ended up, I think, at Manzanar or possibly Tule Lake. I'm not certain which one. There were a lot of there were 7 or 8 that come to mind immediately here in the United States. I've been to 5 of them, and without exception, they were all in remote, desolate areas. The idea, presumably, being that if you put it far enough away from civilization, they're not going to be able to escape because they simply can't carry food and water to get away. There's nowhere really to escape to. So it was pretty horrifying. One of the things that made it so difficult for trying to prepare for these events is, like I say, you had very little time to prepare, and the time you did have to prepare, oh, by the way, the government has frozen all of your bank accounts, so you don't even have access to your own money to make arrangements. You can't hire an attorney. You can't do any of those things. So what was happening, of course, is there's a segment of every society that is particularly good at preying on people in a moment of weakness, and so swarms of these gold diggers would descend on areas where there was high concentration of Japanese citizens, and they would be offering them 5 cents or 10 cents on the dollar for their property. You know, guys were buying cars for $4 and things of that nature, buying houses. There were cases where somebody would drive up in a truck and they would just start digging out landscaping, just digging it out right out of their yard. And the Japanese person who happened to own the yard really wasn't in a position to do much about it. He wasn't going to be there in another week or so. And so they rounded them up. Initially, the first batch of people who were sent to an internment camp were the Japanese who lived on Bainbridge Island here in the Seattle area. It's literally right across the water from Elliott Bay, which is where the Pike Place Market is, and you go straight west across the bay, or the sound rather, and that's Bainbridge Island. The reason the U.S. chose that as their first place was because it was an island and it made it easy to isolate the population and prevent them from getting on or off. So here was what was already effectively a captive population to experiment with and see if this goes according to plan. So they gathered everybody up and they put them on a ferry, and the ferry took them over to Coleman Dock. They took them over to Seattle, from Coleman Dock over to Seattle, put them on a train, and blacked out the windows of the train and drove south past Bakersfield and then back up into the Owens Valley to Lone Pine, and there they were. You know, it's 40 miles from the edge of the Mojave Desert, and they were people who had lived in Seattle all or most of their lives, where a hot day was 82 or 83 degrees, and an overnight low was in the mid-50s, and they shipped them down to the edge of the desert where a hot day was 105 degrees, and the overnight low might very well be 35 degrees. Wind blowing constantly, dust going everywhere. You remember I talked about all that wood that shrinks?
Right.
Well, what happens if you have a dust storm come through, which you do every night?
Correct.
They would get up in the morning, and in the summer there would be trails of dust across the floors and on, the blankets and everything. And in the winter it would be snow.
Terrific. And
yeah, not so terrific.
Not something you want to write home about, but you did write about it. R.L. Pace is with us. Yes, the Rising Sun trilogy. 3 books are involved. Tell us about your publishing process. You went online with this?
I did. I went online, published the first 2 online, and then the better angels of what I was doing decided that maybe what this needed to be was, like I say, initially it started out as a trilogy, and then the more it got involved, the more people were saying, well, maybe this ought to be one really big book instead of 3 smaller books. And so, okay, so at that point you start taking everything apart and reconstructing it on that basis. It's sort of like what we used to call a one-stick remodel, where you lived someplace in a zoning area where you weren't allowed to completely take down a house and build a new one. But you were allowed to remodel an existing house. So they would take everything down except one 2x4 that was sticking up, and then they'd build everything around it because they were remodeling that 2x4.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'm going through right now is, and also they wanted it to go into a print edition. So we're gonna do a print edition, and so that's coming along. Hopefully that'll be done by spring, I think, while we disassemble it. And at that point, of course, you'll be able to order it online.
And right now we have from R.L. Pace, we've got Island Dawn is book 1 and Rising Sun book 2. Now, how do folks get these copies? I would believe it's going through Amazon, is it?
You can get it from Amazon. You can get it from Barnes & Noble, if they're still a thing. But you can get it from Amazon. You'll have to fiddle around. There turns out there's more than one R.L. Pace, and there's more than one Rising Sun book out there. Just as an aside, people who aren't writers don't know this, but you cannot copyright a title.
I've heard that. Yes.
So if I wanted to write a book and call it To Kill a Mockingbird, I can do that. Wouldn't be overly bright because it would sell a heck of a lot more of somebody else's book, but you can do that. So I've got Rising Sun and other people have rising sun. In my case, it talks about a Japanese family. In most other cases, it talks about a messianic figure,
right.
as one might imagine.
Yes. Oh, right.
So that's that's what that is. Right now, if you buy the electronic version that's on excuse me, on Amazon, it's cheap. It's $4 per book. It will end up being a slightly different version than what the revised edition will be. All the content will be the same. It just will be rearranged in a slightly different format. So if you want to get a leg up on it, you can do that, and or you can wait for the full edition coming in the spring. Either way.
And we're talking with R.L. Pace about his Rising Sun trilogy. It's in 2 parts, and the 3rd part is coming soon. Before we let you go, Mr. Pace, let's get into some real fun stuff. You have a U.S. election coming up in a little while. What do you foresee in your vast crystal ball? Because I know you were once a Republican and now you're not, so have at it.
Well, I am loath to use a Canadian person's site to extol the virtues and vices of American politics. I'm pretty sure that the CBC does a pretty good job of that as it is. The United States faces a consequential election, perhaps the most consequential election in my lifetime, and my lifetime is long enough to have seen John Kennedy sworn in as President of the United States. So, actually, it's long enough to have seen Eisenhower sworn in as President of the United States, now that I think about it.
Yep.
So, it's a very consequential election, and there are some people who are characterizing this as it's a vote for the soul of America. And there are others who are a little less hyperbolic about that. The standing of the United States around the world has suffered in the last 4 years, and it needs not just rehabilitation. We need to rediscover what it is to be a good neighbor in the world. And it's my opinion that the current leadership does not have any interest in that, and perhaps wouldn't even know how to begin to approach that if they had such a desire. So, from my point of view, it's time for a change, and that's what elections are all about: is to determine whether or not, as a nation, we like the direction that things are going, and we like how things are being done. And if we do, then we stick with the candidate that we think best aligns with that particular point of view. And if we don't, we vote for the other person. So I'm voting for the other person, and I'm encouraging everybody else, regardless of what your political point of view might be, to vote. Vote early and get your ballots completed and in. If you're in a state like Washington or Utah or Oregon, where voting by mail is the way you vote, get that done. Get them in. Get them counted. If you're in states where it's an option, you might want to consider that as well. Get the voting done early. And the virtue of voting from home is that, first of all, you're not standing in a line in the rain or in the snow or blizzard conditions or anything like that. You're in the privacy of your home, and you can take what time it takes to analyze various candidates' positions and make a thoughtful vote based on your personal beliefs and how you think they line up with that. So I encourage everybody who is eligible to vote, and if you're eligible and not registered, register and vote. So, that's what I think ought to be done.
And we'll leave it at that. R.L. Pace has been our guest here on Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. And one more time, tell us where we can obtain your current works.
Current works you can obtain on Amazon. Just you can either check under Rising Sun Trilogy, and like I say, you'll have to poke around in there to get to mine specifically, or you can put in R.L. Pace, search Amazon in that way. I've written some short stories that are published by Deep Seven Press as part of an anthology. They have nothing to do whatsoever. They're sort of fantasy adventure thrillers as part of a series. So what you would look for is Airship Daedalus. And Deep Seven Press has those. You can probably go to deep7press.com and find those. There's 7 novels and an anthology. I'm in the anthology. There'll be another anthology coming out probably summer that has a couple more of my stories in it. So, and I'm working on putting together possibly some poetry that I've written over the years into what is almost always a very slim volume among poets. So that's where you can find me, is on Amazon or at deep7.com.
And that's our story, and that's R.L. Pace. And thank you very much for your time today.
It's been my pleasure, Dennis. Thanks for calling.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.